more than one speaker at a time, or excuse me, in a row on our side. I yield, Mr. Speaker, now 5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, the gentleman who's Vietnam combat veteran, rifle platoon leader of the 101st Airborne Division, Mr. Boyd.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized. Parliamentary inquiry may be started.
Boyd and I are lucky enough to be in the same committee, and I think we're probably working under the same time constraint. If we could go back to the Republican side, that's what I wanted to ask you. After he speaks.
That'd be fine. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mr. Skelton, for giving me this time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today with my fellow veterans to express strong opposition to sending more than 20,000 additional United States troops to Iraq. And I rise in strong support of the underlying resolution that we're debating today. You know, Mr. Speaker, when thinking about our political and military situation in Iraq, I often reflect on my own service in Vietnam and my thoughts there as a person when I served there as a young man in uniform, proudly defending the ideals on which America was built. I often think, how is it different today? How is today's soldier in Iraq different than soldiers 40 years ago in Vietnam? And I think there are some differences, but there are obviously many striking similarities. Obviously, our soldiers today have communications technologies and other warfighting technologies that are far superior to what we had 40 years ago in Vietnam. Soldiers now have access to a 24-hour news cycle that we did not have in the 1960s. But, Mr. Speaker, what is the same, what is exactly the same, is the fact that our soldiers are trained and equipped to accomplish the mission given to them by their political leaders in Washington. They are trained to execute this mission and to the best of their ability without any thought to whether that mission is right or wrong, or even whether that mission is well thought out. Clearly, this is very similar to what we experienced during Vietnam. When I served in Vietnam, we were trying to execute a mission that was impossible to do because our political leaders had given us a poorly defined mission that we could not win militarily. Our brave men and women serving in Iraq rely on us, their political leaders, to develop a winning strategy, and it is very clear that we are not winning in Iraq by any standard of measurement that you might want to use. I returned from my service in Vietnam at the height of the anti-war sentiment, and let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, there was no worse feeling than coming home after a tour of duty to find that you'd come home to an American society that was not grateful and was not behind you. I want to make sure that our sons and daughters serving in Iraq today do not experience what we experienced 35 or 40 years ago. The American people and their leaders in Congress all support the men and women executing the outlined mission. These men and women who have fought and defended our country should be proud of the job they have done, and we all are proud of them. However, we should have learned from the mistakes our political leaders made in Vietnam and not make those mistakes again. The problems we are having in Iraq have nothing to do with our troops and their ability and their training and their equipment. Our problem is with our policy. The men and women serving in Iraq are counting on their political leaders to develop a successful strategy in Iraq, and interjecting more young American men and women in the uniform into the crossfire of an Iraqi civil war is simply not the right approach. The warring factions in Iraq have been at odds since the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. And the United States military is not going to solve an Iraqi political problem, a problem that has existed between the Sunnis and the Shiites for more than 1,400 years. Past troop surges aimed at stemming the violence in Iraq have failed, and continuing to deploy more American troops will not bring us any closer to a self-governed Iraq. We have been training and equipping Iraqi security forces for almost 3 years. We have 325,000 trained, conducting security operations there. The continuing presence of large numbers of American troops in Iraq only postpones the day when Iraqis will have to assume responsibility for their own government. Ultimately, it is incumbent upon the Iraqis to make peace and promote democracy in their own country. With 140,000 troops currently, of our troops currently in Iraq, the war in Iraq is exhausting our resources. Resources that our people are demanding that we have at home to solve some of our domestic priorities, such as health care and education. And those resources are not only dollars, they're human blood. Again, I stand here today to oppose the Iraqi troop surge because all evidence suggests that it is not a path to victory in Iraq and will only put more Americans in harm's way. Ultimately, the debate today is about one thing: the men and women that proudly wear the uniform, and the best way to take them out of the center of an increasing sectarian conflict and civil war in Iraq.